Approval of the minutes from February 1st, 2024. The April minutes were sent to you for review. Are there any corrections, additions? If not, I will say that they are accepted. Today we're going to talk about a program that's really critical to all electric utilities. And John Williams, our Senior Vice President and Chief Infrastructure and Compliance Officer, is going to introduce his team and talk about KUB's Vegetation Management Program. So John, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. And I'll just start by saying, this is a timely presentation. This time of year, the area we live in is absolutely beautiful. Trees are out, everything's great. We're past some of the blooming stuff, so allergies are starting to moderate a little bit. But as you all have noticed over the last few weeks, Mother Nature complicates that a little bit with wind and storms. And sometimes we've got conflicts with our electric utilities when trees don't stay in place, and they just don't sometimes. So I'm really proud of the work that we've done over time in our vegetation management group. You'll hear today how that's grown. I think it's really interesting, and I hope you find it interesting as well, all that goes into it. It's a pretty complicated program, and they do a great job. And so the way we're going to do this is I'll introduce Elaine and Nick here in just a second, but they're going to go through the overall, a little bit of the history of the program, talk about how we do it, and then at the very end, we'll talk, and this is kind of the punchline of it, we'll talk about 2 recommendations that we're considering, we want to get your input on as we continue to evolve the program and improve reliability for our customers. So with that, real quick, I'll introduce Elaine Reed. Elaine's been with us for 29 years, going on, I think, 30 in December. Elaine's worked in a lot of different areas of KUB that's supported our utilities and our customer areas, and she supervises our vegetation management group. Also, Nick Bridgman. Nick's a forester, been here about 12 years and represents one of many of our foresters that do a really good job balancing aesthetics and reliability and safety and customer care every day. And then Nathan, who I don't know is necessarily going to talk unless ask a question, but he's welcome to. But Nathan's our director of maintenance that works with me and oversees the group as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Elaine.
Yeah, thank you. The vegetation management program supports the blueprint, both the mission and with our customers, to provide not only reliable power, but it has to, and also safe and affordable, because you have to balance the budget and the cost of vegetation and the choices that we have to make in the field, and which is an important part of the program. And John stole my entry. I just want you all to know. But no. But the thing is that we do live in such a lush urban forest, and we're very fortunate for that. But then that means that we have to balance the aesthetics and the reliability and the safety, and that is ongoing all the time. One of the things that help us is that, first of all, we do what's right. And I say that because we're part of the Tree Line USA. And to be recognized by that, we have 5 core standards. One is quality tree care. That means that we just don't go in and just stub a tree and not cut it the way that it should be cut properly. Now, it doesn't mean it's always pretty, but we're doing it for the health of the tree. Another one is the annual workers training, and we train our employees, both our engineering and our construction groups, on when you plan a job, what about that tree that's there that the neighborhood is very proud of? Can we protect those roots when we're doing our construction? Or do we need to even maybe reroute something? So we take all that in consideration, and we train our employees to look for that. We do tree planting and public education. We're required to do an Arbor Day celebration, which is great because we join in with the city of Knoxville to celebrate Arbor's Day together. They are a city tree USA, excuse me, and which they have these same core values that they have to meet. Another is our community partnership, and we partnered with the development, and right now we're in the beginning of the implementation of the Knoxville Urban Forest Master Plan. And that plan includes the City of Knoxville, KUB, Trees Knoxville is playing a vital role, and they are leading this, where they receive grants to be able for us to go into underserved areas, and not only with tree plantings, but education, and maybe even reviewing to see, do they need tools to help them? Because as we know, our city, they're just like our buildings age, our trees age, and those are dying out. And so we need these replacement programs, and especially more in our city area. And we also, with Trees Knoxville and the City Board, Tree Board, we have members on the Tree Board to help represent KUB and understand what's important to the community too. One of our big programs is Right Tree, Right Place. And obviously the first thing you think of is, well, don't plant a tree in the maintenance zone, under our lines. But that's not the only thing that this program is about. It's to provide information about native species. Don't go down and buy a Bradford pear. A Bradford pear is something that is not native to this area, and I call it a temporary tree because when a storm comes, it's not there anymore. But it's educating people to know that, because you don't know that. They're really pretty. They smell terrible when they bloom, but they're really pretty when you see them, and you naturally think, well, that's a great tree to have in my yard. Also, knowing the size of the tree, and I'm not talking about how tall it'll grow, but is the base going to be big at the bottom and you can't mow around it? Things like that that you don't think about. All you think about is we're going to plant a tree. And where to plant it as far as maximizing your shade. We provide tree planting tips and tree care, and the most important thing is giving out the message of call before you dig. Whether you're planting a tree, a flower, anything, we really want to always give that message out so people will understand. And you don't want to damage the utilities. Well, why vegetation management? Okay, obviously the answer is to provide reliable power, but also we have to think about the safety of both our public and our workers. By clearing vegetation, not only pruning and trimming around the tree, but also clearing the right-of-way. We have to be able to respond if there's a power outage, but we also have to be able to inspect our poles and our wires, and they have to have an entrance to get in. 61% of outages have been contributed to vegetation, and that may be the growing into. Our program's working on that. Less than 1% of our outages are due to grow in. Our problem is trees falling or limbs coming down on our lines. In this past weekend, I pulled and I thought, okay, so where's our problems? Is it fines? What's causing the problems on the outage? 86% of this weekend was caused by trees outside of the right-of-way that we don't maintain. So that is, as we go along, it's once again educating people to help recognize what's in their yard and what's causing those is really important. And now have Nick review some of our maintenance programs.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm very humbled to be able to represent such a great group of forestry staff. We have an outstanding group of foresters. A lot of us are UT grads. A lot of us are from here in Knoxville. I'm a UT grad, so I'm very happy to be able to represent our community and continue working with our community. So thank you, first of all. Our vegetation management electric maintenance programs focuses on two portions. Our sub-transmission system really acts as a arterial of the system, which is going to feed power throughout basically from our substation to substation, feeding the substations. That amount of lines is around 265 miles of overhead electric line. We complete that maintenance cycle about every 5 years. So when we average about 50 miles per work on subtransmission line each year. Then what feeds out into the neighborhoods is our distribution system, our 1, 2, or 3-phase systems. That we account for is a little bit over 4,000 miles of overhead line, which is about twice the distance from Knoxville to Los Angeles. That's quite a bit of mileage. We complete that cycle somewhere between 3 and 5 years, and we usually complete somewhere around 950 miles of that line each year. The program as a whole, we take an integrated approach, and all of our programs are very complementary to make sure that we're doing everything we can to help control incompatible species inside the maintenance zone. We do that through tree pruning limbs away from overhead electric lines, infrastructure, utility poles, transformers, everything that's involved with the utility infrastructure. This also includes brush removal with power saws and mechanical equipment to clear brush away from support wires to allow for access into the maintenance zone. If we do have storm outages, it helps speed up restoration time. And like this past weekend events, it can help speed up restoration a little bit. The judicious use of selective herbicides, not just the herbicide itself, but in the manner that we apply is very selective and targeted, so it's not a broadcasted use. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But also our hazard tree identification and removal program I'll talk about in a minute. That's very, very important. We have a couple of foresters that are tree risk assessment qualified through ISA. A lot of us are ISA certified and very well trained on looking for hazards on our system. So how do we prune? How do we go about pruning back limbs away from the electric infrastructure? As Elaine said, we don't top or we don't round over trees, and that's very, very important. One of the things I talk with customers about is indiscriminate pruning leads to indiscriminate growth. If you ever see a stubbed branch, you'll see a lot of growth beyond that point. Because the growth doesn't have the capability to kind of go anywhere. It's stuck from that point and it just flushes out beyond that cut point. So the way that KUB prunes is by a best management practice and an industry approved standard by the Arbor Day Foundation and the American National Standards Institute by lateral pruning. And that lateral pruning, as we mentioned, sometimes it's not as pretty as some trees can be if they're nice and rounded over when they flush out. However, with lateral pruning, that growth is guided away from the overhead utility infrastructure, and the attachments that come with that are more natural branching attachments, more natural branching structure associated with tree physiology. As opposed to topping and rounded over, it's more of a flush and more of a emergency response to growth and impact. So our herbicide program I mentioned earlier, you can see the pictures at the very top. The one on the left is before, the one on the right is after. You can see the growth. It's over our applicators' heads when we're coming in. We target tall growing species that are going to sprout back. So some of the ways that we try to come in and target that, when we're doing circuit maintenance on either sub-transmission lines or distribution, where we come in and we remove the brush, we will apply directly to the stump of these incompatible species, which limits them from sprouting back. It's a systemic herbicide. It's a selective herbicide for this purpose. And you can see the effect on the after. This is, I want to say, a couple years after. We still have grasses. We still have some forbs in that area that grow back. And you can see the mountain bike trail that is actually easier to use as opposed to the picture in the before. In the maintenance zones, in the rights of way, We do sometimes use a foliar application as well, which is pictured the before and after picture at the top to limit that incompatible species in a selective manner. The herbicide itself targets tall growing species, and it's not a broadcast application. It's a selective targeted application where we focus on the species that's incompatible itself. It's not an overspray, it's not a broadcast, it's not anything like that. And our applicators, our contracted applicators, are certified to perform that work, certified through the Tennessee Department of Ag to perform that work and handle it very, very well. Vines on utility poles, anybody who's driven down Chapman Highway, Clinton Highway has seen the issues that we have on our system with kudzu. Throughout the southern U.S., we have major problems with kudzu. But that's not the only vine we have problems with. We have problems with wisteria. There's a euonymus vine that's wintergreen, and then also ivy. We have a lot of problems with that on our electric infrastructure, and we target that by cutting and then spraying around the poles. And we spray anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 poles during a growing season to try to combat that and causing utility outages. And then finally, our bare ground facility application. We have somewhere around 250 or so sites that we come out and we spray to keep vegetation from growing up and growing into conflict at our substations, our gas gate stations, booster pump stations for our water system. Hazard tree removal program. We really focus that effort during our circuit maintenance when we come through. So if we have a tree that we're going to have to prune, but we also identify it as a hazard, we're not pruning it and we're not coming back to do the removal later. So we're lessening our impact on the customer with just coming through one time. We also do some post-storm follow-up. When we have events like this past weekend, if we have a large number of customers that have been impacted through a single event, and that has also happened recently, we will go back out, we'll take a look at this, and we'll see if there's a way that we can reduce the frequency of outages due to vegetation. And we've actually had that happen recently in one of the Carnes areas and had really, really good results out of that, reducing outages on one of the Carnes circuits. Elaine?
Thank you. And to do all this work, we have to have a staff, obviously. And we have 19 staff employees, and that includes 12 foresters on the system, or 14 foresters actually, because our team leads were also foresters. And four staff people that keeps up with all the office needs that we have, which is great, that we have to keep a lot of data. We have to know where the contract crews are at, and they are able to keep all that going for us. We also have 12 pre-qualified contractors. And when I say pre-qualified, they have to go through a procurement process through a third party that vets them, that not only can, if something happens, do they have the bonds to take care of that, but more importantly is to look at their safety record. Because safety, just like for our employees, is very important. It's the same for our contractors, and especially in this industry, because it is one of the top industries in fatalities. All these crews, we have 30 to 50 crews on the system every day, and it's supporting all 5 utilities. So yes, the main thing that we focus on is electric utilities, but we're also supporting like the natural gas to keep their high pressure main pipelines clear per federal regulations, because they always have to have sight of that pipeline. If we need to assist on a construction job with water or wastewater, we have the crews that can go and assist on that also. So in 2010, KUB formed the Tree Trim Policy Review Panel. And to kind of tell you what it was, the climate at that time, a little different than it is today. And TVA, that may have started it, is that not blaming this on TVA, but what had happened prior to that is there had been a national outage that affected several states. And through that network, the outages, and I'm sorry, I don't remember how many millions of people it affected. And it was contributed to vegetation and not maintaining their system. And this was on transmission lines. So utilities such as TVA, now I want to say that they came in and they started clearing more of their right-of-way than what they had done in the past. And they had taken a privacy screen for one of the West Knoxville areas and cut the trees down, which later turned into a lawsuit about that to prevent that. But we were getting the community and some of them coming to us and maybe not happy with some of our practices. And so we thought the best thing that we can do is bring the community in and hear what can we do better. And so this panel was formed, and from that they had 75 recommendations but 150 action items. Out of those 150 action items, we endorsed all except 4. We'll talk about 2 of those a little bit more in depth, but the other 2 were if we cut a tree down, what we do, because the tree does belong to the homeowner, and if they agree, we get permission before we cut trees down. So let me say that. We don't just go in and cut them. But if we have permission, it's kind of a shared responsibility and cost. So we cut it down, we will chip up the brush, but we leave the logs and we cut them in 18-inch lengths. And they wanted all that wood to be carried off. Well, that cost is more than double. So that means that the ratepayer is not just that customer, but all the ratepayers are paying for that disposal. It's not viewed as the way we were looking at it. It's not in the best interest of our ratepayer to do that. So it became more of a shared responsibility, which is what we explain to our customers now.
So how do you handle a customer that says, I don't want my tree cut down?
We say, okay, it's their tree.
But you can see it leaning towards that power line, so you still have no authority to...
We don't.
Okay.
And let me say that if it's, the only time that we will cut a tree down during, say after a storm, or if we see something that we know is a safety hazard, that we have to do it right then. But we do have to respect the homeowner's rights in their property. And I wished I could go and cut them down, to be honest with you, because we do recognize that they're going to be a hazard and they will take the line down eventually. But we still have to, there's a fine line of what you can do with property rights that we try to respect. But that was a good question, and we see a lot of those every day. All of this, as you see, they went from February of 2010, and the final was in 2012. And once everything was implemented, and the board actually endorsed a resolution to implement these changes. One of the things that they asked that we said we couldn't do at the time was in-house staffed foresters. And we had a contract company, and they had foresters, and I want to refer to them because not all of them they all had degrees in something, but not necessarily in forestry or natural resources. And I want to call them the B team. And KUB recognized we want the A team. That's what's important. We want the best for representing our utility, both with our contractors and with our customers. And in 2022, we already had 4 foresters on staff, and we added 10 more foresters. And I have to say, I'm very proud of this part because I see a huge difference in both how our contractors, making sure that they work to our specs. We have 100% inspection, so everything they do is inspected. I would like to say that with when we had contractors, they inspected every single thing, but sometimes there would be doubts in certain things. And also, they give the message of what we want KUB to give the message. This isn't a contractor that maybe doesn't have as much pride in their job as our employees do. And so they're sending the KUB message out. And they're very good about working with that customer. And even giving recommendations, they may call even for recommendations of what to plant or something. They're invested in it and they care. And like I said, just seeing a huge improvement, that one change. And so we're happy that we were able to make that. Our tree replacement program, we do remove, several thousand trees every year, and we offer everyone a tree replacement. And what we're looking at, we've got a wider variety of low-growing trees. And not only do we offer, here's a tree, we just don't go and deliver that tree and set it in their yard. We plant the tree for them. They designate where they would like to have it planted. They can't plant it underneath the lines or in our maintenance zone. We need a place else they can plant. But what we're looking at now is we've started offering in tree equity outreach areas, or in equity outreach areas, that if they have a tree removed, if they'd like up to 3 trees for that replacement, because we're encouraging, just like if we're going to be partners with the city and with Trees Knoxville about replacing trees, and especially in these areas, we want to make sure that we're supporting with our programs at KUB also, not just depending on Trees Knoxville to do that. And one thing that we're developing now is a educational mailing, and it's going to talk about the planting and how to take care of that tree. And then also, if they plant future trees, well, where should they plant that out, or what should the species be? And then also, I always have to put a plug, because it used to be my program, is to call 811. One thing that we did have to change is that with our distribution and our transmission, and when you first talk about it, it kind of makes sense. Well, when you're out there trimming, just do both of them. Well, what happens is your circuits come up at different times. And so you have a circuit, but that doesn't run with the true segment of that line segment of the sub-transmission line. And so there were sections that was getting missed when we were trying to do this. So what we've gone back to do is just create a maintenance program that was just for the sub-transmission line. Because after all, that is the backbone of our whole system. And it deserves the attention. We have to make sure that we do give that attention to it. And so now it is a separate bid contract and run as a completely separate program. On our distribution system, the reason that our circuits, and we say working circuits out of a substation, because the lines go different ways. But what we do is, the reason that we don't work all of them at the same time is that we actually look at the reliability data. Which one do we really, does this one need to be 3 years, where this other line, even though it's going in a different direction, may not need to be trimmed for 5 years. So it's what is best for our customers. And so that's why the other program didn't work. One of the things that we're looking at and that will be in discussion is that a dispute resolution, vegetation management customer advocate. And that was created so if a customer did not agree with what our staff was saying as far as pruning, then they had someone else that was a third party that was in a part. They still worked at KUB, but they weren't a part of our program. And by having that advocate, they could look at everything. Sometimes I'll have to admit we kind of got blinders, and we know what we're doing, wanting to do the work. But this person could come in and look at it and look at everything and what their concerns were.
Is that a contract, or is that a?
No,
KUB employee?
that's a KUB employee.
KUB pays this person to be an advocate.
Well, no, it's just part of their job. That's one of those added duties.
Okay.
And Liz Hannah is, who used to be over the supervisor of vegetation management and now works with the executives, is the person who would be the advocate. The reason that we're asking that maybe to dissolve that role is that last year she got I think that she got 4 phone calls and only one of them was actually a dispute. The other was, can you come and cut my tree? And I just called the wrong number. We have seen over the years, there isn't as much need for that role. The other thing is that because we now have our in-house foresters, they resolve these issues before it ever gets to that point, because they're able to communicate and offer different things. And they have the ability too of saying, you know, I recognize that that's a slow-growing species. We don't have to cut it 10 feet. We can do 5 feet's fine. But they have that leeway that the others didn't so much. And then the other, and the biggest thing is that now our customer support department handles disputes like this. That's part of their daily job. And using them to go out and talk with the customer and resolve issues instead of having just this one designated person that is not getting that many calls anyway, we can put those issues and process them through our customer support department.
So let's chat through that one real quick. And put it kind of in context with what Elaine said. A lot has evolved over time. As you can tell, bringing in-house foresters was a huge shift in a lot of positive ways. The customer communication piece was really enhanced with how we communicate ahead of our trimming processes. And then the tools they have to use are very different than what tools they had, tree replacements, things of that nature in years gone by. And Elaine mentioned our customer processes have evolved along that same 12-year path. So now, in a very similar way, we have a customer resolution process that really takes a lot of the best practices from this role, but is uniform and standardized. So the value there is we have trained customer folks that work for Tiffany, that work with customers every day on issues impacting customers, and they're used to being that independent group within the organization that can work with our stakeholders, whether it's vegetation management or whether it's underground construction or whomever it may be, and they can kind of look at that with a different set of eyes and one that's used to working with the customers, and then make sure we're doing what we're supposed to do and using all the tools we have. And we feel that's better looking back than the advocate role for a couple of reasons. As Elaine mentioned, the advocate role was in part trying to get a view outside that chain of command. Some of the customers from that original panel wanted somebody else to put their eyes on it to make sure that it wasn't a blinder situation where it was a chain of command just checking the box and saying, yes, we did the right thing, yes, we did the right thing, and somebody else looking at that. And then Elaine also mentioned that it's not used very often. So now we have a kind of a one-off process that's not like anything else we do anymore, and it's used very infrequently. And we feel like it's better for our customers to have a process that's worked by trained professionals that work with customers every day, and it's a stable, repeatable process. So with that, it makes sense to us to dissolve the customer advocate, fold that into our uniform customer resolution process. But before we move forward with this, and just for context, we do plan to go to our board with updates on this. The customer tree trim policy review panel that we had, all those recommendations 12-ish years ago, they gave those to us as recommendations, much like you do today, but we wanted to honor those recommendations by taking those to our board and making sure that they were in agreement with what we felt like we wanted to implement and why. And so in the same manner, because these are changes to that, we wanted to get your input as a customer group and go back to our board and explain what those changes are. Yes, ma'am.
How will you select, what is your selection process for those customer service representatives that will be taking that advocate role? How will you select them?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, what I think I'm understanding you to say is that you're going to dissolve the customer advocate role.
Yes,
is that
ma'am.
correct?
Yes,
and
ma'am.
you're going to integrate that within the customer service umbrella.
Yes, ma'am.
Under that. So how will you choose which people from the customer service pool will be that advocate for vegetation? Would you look, I mean, what's the criteria that you're going to choose?
Okay, that's a fair question. So all of Tiffany's group, and I'll let her speak to this, she's always good at correcting me and adding context to what I say and making what I say sound better after she gets finished. So I'll let her go after me. But in short, her group deals with all kinds of issues.
Correct.
Every day. And it's I don't say it's a small staff, but it's a relatively small staff, and they're used to doing this on a regular. Matter of fact, there's probably a couple of people that have worked with vegetation issues anyway. But the one of the things that the advocate role in years gone by is it's not necessarily predicated on having experience or knowledge about trees or the health of the trees. That's why we have the foresters. It's really a look to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to do by our processes, by our guidelines, with the tools we have. We're listening to the customer, we're understanding all those things, and doing what we say we're supposed to do, not overreaching or not being stubborn, those sort of things. But Tiffany, you want to add to it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we do have a smaller staff, about 6 employees that we classify as customer resolution specialists, and they handle escalated concerns. So we have our customer service staff that handles calls that come into our call center, but oftentimes they can't handle everything because they're not out in the field, so they can't physically see a tree, they can't physically see what's going on. So that smaller staff is trained to actually go out in the field. They understand our field procedures and processes, but they're also there to really try to understand the customer's perspective and find a solution that meets both KUB's needs and also that customer's needs. So that group, the selection of who would do the particular work when they go out, anybody from that group could do it. They are assigned to different geographic locations in our service territory. So typically, the person that's responsible for that area would go out and talk with that customer. And one reason for that is we hope that they become familiar with that rep. And so much like Dexter, you had interactions with him. That is his area. And so he learns the community, he learns the people in that area. So oftentimes they trust them a bit more because they've had exposure and experience with them on other customer concerns and other customer issues. Now, if that doesn't work, we have a supervisor and others in that group that will get involved if needed to. And ultimately, sometimes it will come even up to me if it needs to, or John if it needs to. But that staff does a really good job of being a really good advocate and being a go-between, trying to serve KUB's needs, but also really trying to serve the customer and what they need.
Thank you. So as you consider this thought of dissolving the advocate for this particular program, and just for context, this is the only process, the only program at KUB that has its own separate advocate to speak of. Everything else goes through Tiffany's group if there's issues. And that seemed to have worked really, really well. Tiffany has, the good news too is that Tiffany has visibility of all of those that get escalated, and they track those and manage those so that we handle that. But are there any blind spots that we're missing on this one? Is there any concerns that you all have about making this kind of go back into our standard processes?
I don't think that we are qualified to make
Yeah.
that assessment at this
Sure.
point in time, but I was just really curious how you were going to absorb that position into people. who-
And I think, as Lane mentioned,
Yeah, but
it's
that
about
was a good
once, maybe about once a year
explanation.
that we have an issue. Because I think the one thing that I'll say, the original panel had some wisdom, and even though we weren't able to financially absorb the cost of the foresters originally, over time by being able to do that, it fundamentally changed the program. Having people like Nick and people that know what Nick knows out in the field working with our customers, and the fact that they can repeat those cycles over time, we've really got a consistent process to where it's just really rare. I'm not saying that there's not customers that don't want us to cut trees. That's not the case, because anytime you're trimming trees that customers are fond of, that may not be what they're wanting. But by working with our foresters and how they explain things and work with them, those disputes that are escalated have essentially gone away for the most part.
going back to your question, just thinking about it.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Your training piece is over here in the HR department, to be able to deal with customer relations, customer. So that makes sense to me.
Okay.
That you have someone that understands how to talk to people, listen to people, get back to people. Where if I'm that other person, I'm like, yeah, okay, we'll see what we can do, and hang the phone up and go about my business. But it's the training piece and the relationship piece that I think that you're picking up over there on the HR side.
Well, I think we're thinking the same thing. I just want to make sure there wasn't any blind spots on that one. So thank you all for that. The second one is, if y'all want to advance that slide, I'll kind of give some context here. And yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
didn't have a question. I just wanted to say that I think that Tiffany's idea of having someone who can actually go out into the field is really important, because there are lots of things, I mean, I work with CAC.
Yes, ma'am.
And so there are lots of things that you can't really resolve over the telephone.
Yes.
And if you can just say, can we make a time when someone can come out and actually speak to you about this, that usually is the first step in having a good resolution. So I think the fact that you've got capacity to go into the field and actually be on site and interact with the customer, I'd say, yeah, I think that's a very good part of the process.
Yes, ma'am. No, I agree with you 100%. I've had the pleasure of working with construction for years, and Tiffany's folks are our favorite people, because the work that we do is invasive, you know, whether it's new service work or Century 2 work or a lot of things that we do, and whether it's yard restoration or a lot of things like that. Our construction folks, you know the construction, and they're as good as they can be working with customers. They're around here. They're good-hearted people, but we have a phone a friend with Tiffany's folks constantly, and they're a blessing to us to be able to go out, talk to the customer, be that interface. And we think, and I think you would know we're biased on this, but we think they do a really good job of not only representing the customer, but also representing KUB. So thank you very much for that. So this next one is one of the things that we did. We made a change in the program based on the panel's original recommendations. And just so it gives you some context, so Nick talked about the difference in trimming between our sub-transmission. He talked about the arterial. So think about in a roadway, maybe the interstate system, and that's trimmed 25 feet left and right of the line and from ground to sky. So up and down, left and right, we got plenty of space. We would like to have more, but we got plenty of space, as much as we can get, to trim around those lines. When you get into the distribution circuits or those community circuits, so think about the Rocky Hill area, Nick mentioned the Carnes area, Straw Plains, Ball Camp, those communities. Those lines, we get a much smaller clearance. So we get basically a 10-foot tunnel around the lines. We used to trim 10 foot left and right, and then all the way up and down. But after these recommendations, we began leaving a canopy over those lines. Now, there's an exception if the tree is obviously diseased or dead, then obviously the foresters can work to make those needed cuts. But that's a difficult thing to do. So when we have overhang over our lines, you impose an additional layer of risk when wind happens, because gravity is generally going to prevail. And when trees fall, we'd rather them not impact our electric system. So as we've started talking through the investments we're making in the electric system, and you've heard recently about our inflation response plan funding. You've heard a lot about Century 2, our grid hardening, so replacing poles, upgrading our wire size, doing things to harden the system, as well as investments being made in grid modernization, so fiber, our system automation devices that try to localize automatedly, that's not really a word, I don't think, automatedly, but in an automated fashion, they try to localize and minimize the impact through that fiber connectivity and being able to make all that work. And we've seen some gains in that. So good news is those investments are really paying off, and our reliability is steadily improving. At the same time, when we look at the numbers, despite all their great work, 61% of our outages are still caused by trees. And a subset of that, so about 15 to 20% on average, is caused by limbs that are overhanging those community lines. So we know that there's a risk to our lines that are real. Elaine mentioned this past week's storm. I noticed several updates where it was removing limbs from lines, and that's all that could be managed. And so we think it's a material enough issue to bring it back and talk with you all to kind of value aesthetics versus reliability from a customer perspective, because we know customers are expecting higher reliability more so now than ever. You've got more and more people working from home, more and people relying on technology, businesses operating computing equipment and technology that is much more sensitive than in years past. And then you've got the whole movement with electrification, with more electric vehicles, and a lot of things that where reliability does indeed matter in that, in even transportation regards now. And so as all that demand for reliability increases, which we welcome, we feel like it'd be irresponsible for us not to bring this up, knowing that it is a cause of some of our outages. And so what we are contemplating and intend to recommend to the board is that we go back to more of a ground-to-sky clearance on our community lines and not leave that canopy over the lines. From a aesthetic perspective, it's going to make a difference. It will look different than it did. Can I borrow the clicker? I think you had some really good pictures that I can kind of show. So this here kind of shows where that canopy is to some regard. You can see in the ice, obviously with ice and snow, it weighs down more over there, and those limbs and branches can come down. But when you look, let's see here, just to give you a better visual example, there you go. So in this visual, you've got ground to sky. So straight up and down, left, right, up and down, you've got clearance. And that's what we would be recommending this look like as well. So instead of that overhang here, you would have a straighter view to the sky. So if that limb falls, it wouldn't impact the electric system.
John,
Yes.
here's my question, because
Yes.
I wanted to come back to this picture. When you cut a tree basically in half like that, the weight redistributes to go this way. How do you manage that?
I'll let Nick answer that. You're welcome, Nick.
Well,
We answer it all the time.
well, the number one most important thing is how you're performing these cuts. And performing these pruning cuts laterally is the most responsible way to perform any type of tree pruning operation, whether it's lifting a crown or lateral pruning or overhang removal or reduction or whatever, because the tree can compartmentalize that limb. So that's number one. You're not doing something that's going to encourage a cavity or some type of structural weakness in the stem of the tree. So basically, the stem of the tree is as strong as it was before. So what you're looking at is any issues as far as the branches go on that side of the tree were pre-existing or root issues. So when we come through and we're assessing trees like we mentioned before during circuit maintenance, or one thing I actually neglected to speak about was service requests with customers that calling and asking us for removals. I'd like to mention that in just a second, but when we go through, we evaluate the trees that we look at, for the overhang removal, like Mr. Williams mentioned, for dead, diseased, weak, or structurally compromised limbs for overhang. In the event that we find trees where some species are more prevalent to have issues with root rot in that area, in our area, and we know those species, some of those are red oak species are very prevalent to heart rot. We pay a lot of attention to that, and that's something where if we have to remove a large amount of overhang, we're going to recommend removal of that tree instead of just the overhang removal of the tree, because of the threat that not just the tree provides to either a structure or the utility infrastructure, which is what our maintenance is focused on, but also any other personal or public property. So the tree has its weight, it has its structural stability as it is, but the thing that causes vast majority of outages and structural failures in trees and uprooting come from root diseases, root cavities, heart rot, things like that. I don't know that I've ever seen a weight issue on a tree cause a uprooting that didn't have a disease.
Ice, snow, wind pushes, weighs down that tree on that side, because that's where your branches are.
Mhm.
You're saying that because of the stem of the tree, it still can sustain that?
If it is stable and healthy, it would. In my professional opinion, it would. Now, that being said, another thing I would add before I talk about the service request for just a tiny second, is that anytime, one thing our program has always offered our customers is anytime we prune a substantial amount out of a tree, is if we can do it safely, which is the number one thing we focus on with our work, if we can do it safely and we're going to have to prune or remove a substantial amount of the canopy out of the tree, and that's going to impact the tree and the tree's longevity and health, then we would offer removal of that tree to the customer. And I think we have some program directives that is 25 to 33% of the canopy of the tree, where we try to get the removals, and we offer that to our customers. Sometimes that's space limited, where we may not be able to get equipment back there or things like that. But, in this instance, you can see, we're taking 40% of a tree canopy out, and that tree would qualify for removal under, current standards, especially with a three-phase line. If I came across there and I felt like that tree was going to be pruned heavily or had been pruned heavily, that might be something we would say qualified for removal.
Okay, I know you want to get back to your other piece, and I
No.
appreciate you answering that.
No, we're asking you questions. No, this is good.
But now I'll shift back over to Mark, who crunches these budgets and crunches all these numbers, and Nathan sits there and say, I hope I get the money to do all of this that I need to do. So how's that affected the budget over the years? Because we're changing this program. So how's that going to affect your budget?
It is going to increase the cost.
Especially if they're doing.
And Mark and I have talked about that, and we don't, our plans, first of all, I think our vegetation management program is well-funded. We have made a lot of investment in vegetation management, and part of the inflation response plan funding we have adds to that as we continue to grow our system and try to work on our liability. So we don't intend for these changes to add to the budget. What we have to do is just manage that budget more effectively.
What do you think about that, Nathan?
Oh, Nathan's good. Yeah, I can answer that. No, but I say that is because, and I'll say that's the beauty of having the in-house foresters too, is they understand that and they're able to balance that decision really well. But we have the ability through the contractors we have and how we bid that work. If we're running hot and heavy on removals or whatever the case may be, we can speed up, slow down, add, reduce the work from a budget perspective, so we keep Mark happy, and then from there, we just continue to work that through the process. So it's a great question, and trust me, Mark already asked me that earlier on. Yeah.
That is true. When he came to me, he said, that we'll add dollars for this, we will manage it, I'm not asking for any additional overall dollars. I trust him.
And Mark smiled.
The one thing for remember is that when we talk about the overhead, when we talk about removing this, it's a one cycle, and then when we go back to the next cycle, there's not any work to be done because it's already been removed. And so that's another thing is that you're going to have maybe a 5-year impact, and then after that, not because you're removing the overhang, maybe for other reasons, as far as contractors in the bid process for those, but once that overhang is removed, we don't have to do that again.
We see a lot of sprout and growth maintenance and what we see on the system now, that would eventually, turn into after the first cycle of whatever grow back we get with that lateral pruning that doesn't encourage heavy sprouting. We're directing that growth away from the utility maintenance zone and not allowing that to flush back into the maintenance zone, and just trying to tie that back to the appropriate pruning style kind of helps lessen how much time you're spending on site, when time being money is, very relative.
Yeah.
To the extent you're improving reliability with this, then costs that you incur in storm restoration are going to go down as well.
What are the desired measurements that you all want on the distribution?
So 10 left and right either side, and then ground to sky. Yeah, so just like on the picture on the right, it would basically be a mirror image, just replace the 25 with the 10.
Do you
So-
have the data to say how much of this damage is caused by that overhang?
It's about 15 to 20% of the tree. So you look at the 61% pie. So of that 61% pie, about 15 to 20% of that is from those limbs that fall down. As Elaine mentioned, a lot of our outages are actually caused by trees that are outside 10 plus feet or 25 plus feet that fall into the lines that we don't maintain nor have the jurisdiction to maintain. So the majority of those we can't necessarily affect, so we're relying on grid hardening, the modernization, our switches, trying to minimize that impact. This, though, is fully in our side of our control, and so that's why it kind of bubbled up for us to have the discussion. And I will say that 15 to 20%, I think, again, fully say I'm biased, but that data comes in from our crews. It's hard to say at times whether it came from above or below or exactly where it was. So I think that's a little bit understated, because a lot of times they use a category that's just kind of non-descriptive and goes in the bigger 61% bucket. But when they know for a fact it's there, then they'll put it in. So I think it's probably closer to 20, 25% of that, but the data says 15 to 20 year to year.
I know this is an expensive proposition, but do y'all consider trying to move any lines underground?
So that's always a question that's asked. I'll answer it the best way I can by saying, first of all, it is very expensive. Second of all, it does disrupt root systems and other things in a very equal way, so it doesn't necessarily avoid the problem. And third, as you all know, we share the poles with others. So we rent space on our poles to other attachers, communications companies and others. And so to materially impact the aesthetics, everybody, so your for-profit communications companies would also have to agree to bury their lines, and pulling all that off would be virtually impossible. So, but it is a significant cost. We do, on a case-by-case basis, look to see from a reliability perspective, if there happens to be a section that's causing us more to maintain overhead than the cost to bury it, then we will look at, and engineering will actually work up a design and putting that underground, but those are rare. The cost of putting that up, good, bad, or indifferent, the cost of repairing and trimming and that kind of stuff are much less than putting it underground.
One thing that we also work with engineering is that putting in a new line or rerouting, we will look and see and go out with them and say, well, this isn't, can we go across the street? There's less trees, or there's no trees there. And so when they're doing a design, to also take that into consideration, not only, they may think that going from A to B in a straight line, well, that's much cheaper, but if they really look, if they went across the street, that maintenance that we have to do year after year after year, if they can look at that and factor in with their cost. And we've been successful where we could about doing that. And that helps her in the future, of course.
Could
And
I
that was a
just
learning
say-
curve for them, so.
Excuse me, could I just say, like, from an overall point of view, I could see where people might prefer the look of the canopy, overall, But from an individual customer point of view, in my experience, I don't think the customers like the lateral pruning system. And I think, people that I've spoken to think that it makes the tree look weird, and there's a lot of, I've never, I don't know of anyone who's ever said, KUB has come and pruned my tree in this lateral way, and I really love it.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm not so sure from a customer point of view whether there is a strong preference for one or the other,
Yes,
from
ma'am.
that point of view. I think people are just anxious when their tree is going to be cut, and, but I don't know that there's a lot of popular support for the one that you're currently using. Do you feel that way too? Like, don't you get complaints from people saying, now my tree doesn't look the way I thought it was going to look?
And that's why we explained to them, we're a Tree Line USA and recognized for 22 years because we're doing it and cutting for the health of the tree, not because it looks good,
Right.
to be honest
Yeah.
with you. And through the lateral pruning, and let me say, I'm not a forester, but working with them and what they've educated me on is that when you do lateral pruning and bring it back, if you do a stub cutting and it looks pretty when it grows back out because all the leaves are on it. But if you leave that stub there, then the tree can't heal itself. It's just like if you cut yourself. And so if it's brought back, then that wound where you've cut heals over. But that's not always the case if you stub it, because then you start getting infestation from disease and insects. And so that's the reason we do it. It's for the health of the tree.
Right.
If we cut it like everybody would prefer, that it looks really pretty, then they're going to have, as time goes on, that tree's going to die quickly.
And I think one of the things that the foresters do as well is try to explain, because this actually looks good versus some, there's some that are much worse. There's some that are V-cut.
Yeah, I know.
And you've seen them. And so no doubt, some of the trees, the way we have to do it for the health of the tree and to get the clearance, in our opinion, it might be better if we remove that tree and plant something in its place, which we pay for, that is a more suitable tree, right place. But ultimately, it's a customer's decision, and so we try to work with, I say we as if I do something there, but Nick's group works with the customers, and they will try to explain, here's what it's going to look like, and we offer that removal, we offer that replacement, because I think they know better than anybody what that's going to look like, and it will be healthy and structurally sound, but may not be the neighborhood favorite.
Would you still offer that with the clear?
Yes.
So-
Yes, as Nick mentioned, when we reach those certain criteria about when it gets to a certain point, then we offer the removal.
Anyway.
And the replacement. Yes, ma'am.
That sounds fine to me.
And you wanted to talk about the service request, right? Yeah, please do.
I came to KUB almost 13 years ago, about 12 and a half years ago, and one of the things that really impressed me about KUB when I came on was the will of KUB to really stand by the appropriate pruning standards and really do what they had to do that for the sustainability of the trees in the urban forest. And that was really, really important for me. I moved here from Memphis. I was the executive director for the State Urban Forestry Council for a little bit. And it was an easy move for me moving here to Knoxville and seeing the work that KUB did. And we've had some scenarios where we've seen trees on Sutherland Avenue, where if KUB really wasn't abiding by those lateral pruning standards, that the trees wouldn't have survived as long as they did because of the capability of them compartmentalizing because of that pruning method. And it does lessen the amount of impact. Any pruning or any storm damage or anything has an impact. It is, if it reduces the amount of cuts, that's lessening impact. And if it's a better compartmentalization of the wound and the time that the wound is open, that's way better scenario for the tree to have an open wound that closes way faster. Yes, ma'am. And John, just to mention what we had talked about earlier with the trees, that may have a large portion of the canopy taken out. 25%, I think, is the industry standard to say, you know, if try not to prune more than that, and that's where we stand at. If we, in our program guides, is that if we do have to do that, that it could have more of an impact than we would like to have on the customer's tree. And in that scenario, then we would offer removal, or it may qualify for removal by KUB. And in scenarios, the customers can contact KUB for to have one of the foresters come out and evaluate a tree on their property that they have a question about, or they may have a concern about if it qualifies for removal by KUB. And we get anywhere from 100 to 200 of those requests a month. You know, over 2,000 a year. We handle quite a bit of those. So I would always encourage anybody here to contact KUB if you ever had any questions or wanted a forester to come out and visit with you at your property to look at something around the utility infrastructure.
So I want to be respectful of your all's time. I think the high level question here is really, as we evaluate our program and try to improve reliability for all of our customers, knowing this is 20% of our tree outages, knowing that there will be an aesthetic change, it's just a value question really about aesthetics versus reliability. We believe, based on the customers that call us proactively wanting tree removals, that we think more customers as a whole value reliability over aesthetics in their day-to-day lives. But we want to kind of get a gut check. Again, we don't want to have blinders on and get your input. So any last comments or questions before I turn it back over to Dawn?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
no, I was just going to ask what the increase in tree removal is going to be, because I would assume this impacts the biggest trees, not the small ones. So the 25% is going to, and again, this is a reliability decision, not a tree health decision.
Yes.
So I think those are the two you have to weigh out. I like the comment earlier made about data. I mean, you can run trials, you can do some things to understand the percentage to have a better number.
Okay. Thank you.
My understanding has always been, and it may just been understanding, I don't know this for fact, is that KUB is under some federal requirements being a utility for reliability of service. How does that factor in? I'm sure it doesn't go into exact distances and stuff, but where does that factor in, or does it?
So really TVA's got those requirements. We have Elaine mentioned that from a safety perspective, public safety, we've got to make sure that we keep the public safe. And so those minimum clearances, and that's really what that is those minimum clearances we're allowed to maintain, is designed for that public safety to keep limbs from contacting lines, from becoming energized, from becoming a public safety issue. But no, and I think that's where the original issue came about, because the issue that Elaine was referring to was that northeast blackout that happened. That's where TVA responded, began exercising their vegetation management program more assertively because of those federal requirements. No, thank you, Terry. That's a good question.
I know you all do a great job with relationships. And I think, again, this is where Tiffany's folks come into play in understanding how to build those relationships and be kind to folks, because homeowners shows up and in their driveway, 5 trucks trimming trees back, and they look like the one to the extreme right. Nobody explained it to them, talked to them, and that tree ends up like that. That wouldn't be a happy customer.
Yeah, no, I can assure you, again, I keep going back because I'm really proud of our foresters, but the beauty of having that team of foresters and having worked with our customers,
Yeah.
they know the areas that take great pride in their trees, and we will make sure that we work with them. I can't guarantee you that no one will be surprised, because that's a two-way thing where people have to be engaged and looking and reading and checking things, but we will do our absolute best to communicate proactively, get out ahead of that. And then if there are issues, we'll work with them either through the forestry group or through Tiffany's team to try to come up with the best resolution. Thank you.
All of y'all did a great job.
They did do a good job, didn't
Yeah,
they?
a great job.
Yeah.
And when Nick takes the technical piece and explains it,
Yes,
thank you.
absolutely. Thank you very much. Any other last minute questions?
Is
Thank
there
you.
any information that you need or would like to send to your own constituents about if they need to talk to anybody at KUB about tree trimming or tree removal, or would that be helpful to any of you?
I think it would be, yes.
If we could see a problem in the community with oversized trees, would it be prudent to give you guys a call to just at least let somebody come in and do an assessment?
Before any planned maintenance work that we do, we notify our customers, and, we're out in the neighborhoods. We do that, 950 miles a year on maintenance, on distribution, and we're out there, looking for hazards or looking for issues that we may come into. We send postcards out in the mail to give all of our
Okay, yeah,
customers a
I've
heads
got
up,
those.
and it says on the postcard, if you have any concerns or questions, give us a call.
That's a good
But,
thing.
yeah, number one, we don't want our customers to be surprised.
Mm-mm.
And then number two, if you ever have any questions, that's what we're here for, is to serve our customers.
Well, I tell you, we had about 6 or 7 KUB trucks in our parking lot today at Greater Warner. So everybody's in Burlington, just, really doing a lot of stuff. So they're our new neighbors. KUB boom trucks and everything, so, yeah.
Well, thank you guys, you did a great job. And it is a complicated subject, but it is really critical when you're trying to maintain an electric system. Our next meeting is going to be October 3rd, and we've heard suggestions from CAP members that you'd like the opportunity to maybe have some breakout groups, smaller working discussions with KUB about one or several topics. So between now and then, we hope to facilitate that type of model for our October session, and we will be in contact with you to talk a little bit about that, since we've got several months' time to plan it. If you have any thoughts or anything you'd like us to include, just give us an email and let us know. And other than that, unless there are some last-minute questions for the vegetation management team? Okay.
I'll answer this because they have to deal with those customers a lot. I think anything that ends in hills, and you think about it, I mean, we have beautiful communities with hills, and if you have hills and lots of trees, it's just problematic. And it's not their fault, because they were there before the lines were, right? So, I mean, it's not as if, all that, but yes, anything that ends in hills is generally problematic, and the tree areas, typically, you can look on our outage map, and you can typically find where those areas are pretty quick.
And if it does end with hills, that also means that it's an older area that has been developed. And so now that not only, just like everything else, not only is it older, but so are the trees, and they're declining also. So it's a combination of sometimes not too fun to deal with, but that adds to the problems, is because of the decline of that area as far as their canopy.
The healthiest day for the trees were yesterday.
Yeah.
Ty, do you have something?
Yeah, just a quick question. What's the percentage of outages due to the sub-transmission lines failing? Is it 0?
Failing?
No, it's not zero.
I mean, trees hitting them. I mean, they have a 25-foot offset all the way vertical already.
Unfortunately, and I'm sorry I don't have that number with us, it does happen because you have trees that are falling outside of that maintenance zone that are taller than 25 feet.
John, do you know by chance? It's a smaller percentage because of the width, but anytime we have a major storm, it's not unlikely that we might have an issue.
Yeah, we occasionally have an issue. The advantage of the sub-transmission system is we have a lot of redundancy built in. It's fewer miles, so 256 miles. And most of our system is fed with redundant feed. So even when a tree does impact us, we're able to quickly restore service.
You know the number.
I do not know the.
No, I mean, like, having to go out and fix the damage, you should know how many, even if you don't have a loss of power.
Yeah, I don't have the number off the top of my head. It's.
I was just curious.
We can follow back up.
a very low
If it's
percentage.
okay with you, we
Yeah.
can include that in the information you follow up with and put that out there.
And again, it's only 256 miles of exposure, so it's going to be significantly less than the 5,000 miles of exposure or 4,000 miles of exposure for the distribution system. But yeah, we can get that number.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm only asking, I don't necessarily have an issue with change other than the foresters believe that the less pruning is better. And then now we're going to ask to, now you're asking to prune more for reliability. And you have the same problem even with the tree near your house. It's like, you know, when's the time do you trim it back or cut it or get rid of it? And I just feel like if people have big trees near power lines, you're going to get pushback. Because it's going to be the biggest trees. It's going to be the biggest, beautiful ones that are going to get impacted.
You're exactly right.
Any other comments or questions? If not, we are adjourned. Have a good rest of the summer. We will see you in October, but be talking to you between now and then.